get started. Since we're going to use NX, we'll do npx create NX. I believe it is just create, or maybe it's just create NX workspace. So the workspace name is going to be Angular Sudoku. We'll create an Angular workspace. The application name, Angular Sudoku. I'm a big fan of Sass, SCSS. And let's use the NX Cloud. For a workflow, I was thinking about things today, and I think I want to just experiment with Storybook a bit more. And so we'll create an NX library for the Sudoku board game, a console. This is actually, I'm using the Windows terminal, and then I'm using Oh My Posh to do a lot of the highlighting. And then I'm using some PowerShell extensions to do a lot of the color highlighting. And I really like it because if I do an LS, it adds icons and coloring to the shell. There's some extensions to do that right now. If we go into the Angular Sudoku. All right, and this is why I like the extensions that I've added to the shell. It kind of just makes everything look a lot nicer. But as it stands, we've got an empty Angular repo, and it's time to get started. First thing we want to do is create a new library. We're just going to use NX to do that. And that is on the wrong screen. So we're going to generate a library. We're just going to generate an Angular library. We'll call this the Sudoku components. We're in the Sudoku, so we'll just call this the components library. We'll leave the library as it is. Don't need a module spec. We can worry about Tailwind later. Doesn't need to be buildable. Compilation mode, we're just going to leave it as is. It's going to default to full, I believe. The import path, we'll just call it sud components. Lazy loading, sure. ESLint, sure. The parent module, we'll worry about later. Prefix, we'll just use the SUD. It's not going to be publishable. I'm trying to decide. I don't think we'll make it routable. We'll add routing options later. Did I turn on lazy? If we don't make it routable, we can't turn on lazy. The parser options, I don't know that we're going to need those for ESLint, and I'll investigate some good ESLint stuff to add to this project. Everything else, I think we can leave as is. Standalone config. Nah, we're good. Definitely strict. And I'm more excited to get into trying to develop components using a storybook focus, and even potentially looking into using Storybook to do a lot of our component testing. Let's go ahead and run this and get our library generated. That all worked. I think we can also generate in here Storybook. We can just add a Storybook configuration. The name of the project is going to be our components. I think we'll leave Cypress for now. So we're going to run this. We've got our Storybook all set up inside of the library. So the next thing to do is generate a scam module. And the reason I'm going to go with scam is because I would like to use standalone components when we do when we move to Angular 14. And as it stands, I've seen an ng-neat package that will turn your scam components into standalone components. So we should be able to use that tool to go to standalone when we go to Angular 14. So the first component is just going to be the cell. The name of the project we're going to put it in is in components. We're going to use SCSS. Change detection will be on push. We definitely want them to be display blocked. We're going to inline the scam. That's going to generate the ng module in the same file as our component. Everything else, I think we're going to leave as is. It should use just the default selector, but I'm going to use added just to be safe. And it's a component, so we're going to generate this component. Now we've got the component. So if we just do nx run components storybook, that should run our storybook. If we come into here in our files and we go into our libs, components, into our cell, and we just add a new file. We just call it cell.stories.ts. So now we've got a new story. We can import meta and story from Storybook/Angular. And can export defaults. And we'll just call this one a cell. And we will need to import the cell, but we can, the component will be the cell. We can import. Oh, it's cell component. And this is as meta. And then we can export our primary story as a story. And we're going to give it some props when we need them. But for right now, I think we're good. So if I save this, it should pick up that story. And in Storybook, we've got our cell, which is rendering that the cell works. So that's awesome. So we've got that all committed. And we're at a good point where we can actually start working on the individual cell for the Sudoku game. So what I'm envisioning, and it might be a little bit hard to do in ASCII, but what I'm envisioning is kind of a 9, Sudoku is a 9x9 grid, and within that grid, you've got these cells, and what I would like the cells to do is be able to change the background color depending on the state of the cell. For example, within the rules of Sudoku, you can't have 2 of the same number within the same line, or within the same column, or within the same, little 3x3 grid. And I would like to be able to change the background colors to highlight, and the text and everything to be able to highlight, hey, you've got an error. And there are other things that this cell will be able to do as we work through the game, but that's kind of the biggest one that I want to work on right away. And so let's start with that. So the cell itself, and part of the reason why um, I added the display block is that now when we add a cell to a Sudoku grid, the cell is going to have a size. And so one thing I would like to do, and this comes down to using CSS variables, right? Being able to change. Well, do I want to use a CSS variable right now? Probably. I would say we probably want to use CSS variables just in case down the road, and down the road, if we want to add themes, right? If we start out using CSS variables right away, then further on down the road, we can theme this. So that leads to a good question as to where to put these CSS variables. Typically, you would put them in the root of the app itself. But for now, we'll put our CSS variables right here in the host. So we're going to have an error background, and we'll make that error background, make it something red, and we'll give it like I don't know, 70% opacity, maybe. We'll experiment with that for right now. And then the error color, this is what we're going to use for the foreground. We'll just make it a pure red with a flat. Citadel asks, does the size of a cell matter as long as they're all the same size? Seems like it could be hard coded for now in the CSS. That's a good question, and that's something that, you know, since we're going pure CSS, we'll work through that, right? When we get to the grid. For now, yeah, when in the story itself, we can set the size in the story. That's something that we can do. So we've got the error background, and we've got the error color. So the next thing we want to do, and you know what, let's move these up to the top in our host so that we can say that we want the background color to be var error background, and our color. Ooh, no, we don't want to do that. There was a reason I didn't do that already. And the reason for that is that the cell needs a status, right? So within the cell, we're going to have an input, and it'll just be a simple text input. Actually, we can do a numeric input, right? We're going to wrap this with a div. And this div, we're gonna put a class on it. So one thing we're going to need is we can do a class dot error, and we'll just put a has error on this class. And that will be an input on the actual component itself. So we'll go ahead, I'm just gonna add an input, and it will be so for right now, now we need to create the error class, right? And this will be where we give it a background color of our error background. And we're going to give it a foreground color of our error color. So now what we can do is we can go to our storybook. There's my primary. Okay, we'll add some controls to our story. So right now a cell really is just an input. Let's look at a new story. So we'll add another story, and this story will be our has error story. And we are just going to set some props. And our props are has error is true. And yeah, tab 9 is incredible quite often how well it understands my code and what I'm trying to do. But now we've got our has error story. It's got a red background. I don't love it, but we'll work on it. So right now things are kind of looking terrible. So let's work on that. Let's give our input a bit of a presence, right? Right now, our input, it doesn't really look like a cell. When I think of a cell, I think of this input being small, limited to only numbers. And if it has an error, and that's still a little too dark on the red. We'll work on that red. But if there's an error, I envision this having a bit of, a bit of a margin or padding around it, so that it stands out, and you can see the error around it. I envision the text in the input being red, and also the border of the input being red. So let's work through that, and let's make this cell look a lot nicer. That will fix the issue we've got there. I think we can also add a range validation on it, right? We can add a min and a max so that they can only enter in values from 1 to 9. And let's go back to our stories. Actually, on the cell component itself, I'm thinking, and you guys let me know how you feel about this, but I'm thinking of some sort of state management solution. Oh, interesting. So you do an input plus host binding on Storybook, and then you can play with the colors in Storybook. That's really good. We'll have to take a look at that. So you add the input, and you do a host binding on it. So you're saying something like this, huh? And then we bind to. I need to look up the host binding for CSS class. Is that what you're saying, Nart? Or are you saying that here? Well, so there's one problem that I have with doing it that way. And my problem is that I'm currently using a CSS variable. Oh, I see what we could do. I see what you're saying. You're saying that because I'm using a CSS variable, we could do a host binding. Well, we don't even necessarily need a host binding, right? What we could do is we could have a setter. And so we could do get background color. And that will return a string. And we can have a private variable and call it background color. And that can be a string or undefined. And this can just return and I need to return that. And then we can have a setter. And this can set the background color. But the other thing we can do is set the CSS variable. So yeah. Okay. Yep. Okay. We're on the same same wavelength, and I actually really like this. I need to add a query selector to get my host. I can totally do that. This is where you're saying the host binding, right? So in the HTML, no, I can just do a flat host. Can I just do a host binding to itself? Is that a possibility? Just do so in the cell component. Can I set a host binding and call it component, and it's going to be of type cell component, and then I can just do this dot component. So you need to inject an element ref, huh? I can't do. So I've got a background color. So you're saying if I do an element ref here, I need to look up how to inject an element ref. It's been a while since I've done this. And I think I just inject that in the constructor. But it's been a while since I've grabbed an element ref. Yeah. So I can. In the constructor, I don't want this. I don't want the view child. What we want to do is we want to get at those variables that are inside of the host. So I can just do And I've got the private read only. Wrong way. So then I should be able to just do this dot host container native element dot style. And we're going to change those in JavaScript. So I'm just looking at MDN right now to make sure that I use the right. So element.style.get property value. So I should just be able to call get property value. Oh, look at that. And I should be able to just do set property here. And I can just do error. Did I just call it background color? Error background. And set that to value. That's actually, I'm really glad you showed up, Nart. That is incredible. Maybe we'll try that next. This is not where I expected to go today, but I'm really enjoying kind of where we're exploring right now. It's a lot of fun. Looking, playing around with the CSS and things like that. So now in the stories, I need to add the instrumentation. So I just need to import template. So in our stories, we still export the default, but then we also do and inside of here, I don't even think we need anything beyond that. I think we can just do this and then just do our story is rather than doing this, we just do a template.bind. I believe that will work. Pass it an empty object and has errors. We can bind here. And inside of here, we can do args as error true. I believe this will work. No. What am I missing? All right, so here's your Stackblitz. That's pretty cool. And you're just using a color picker to do that. Where is your, look in your HTML. So you just did a type equals color and an ng model equals color. And then here, interesting. And so then you just did a bind to that color. As we change that, that's pretty cool. That's really cool. And so you would do that in Storybook too.